Hi everyone, welcome to the latest episode of Got China. So gentlemen, what are we discussing today?
Well, what's the hottest topic in town? I mean, especially for the people who think they matter.
I think that should be the third plenum, right? Because, well, it's very important, like, to the policy making in China. Although I guess it might be a little bit boring if we talk it like for the whole episode.
Are you sure we want to talk about it?
Well, you know, the third plenum, as Jiang put it, is also known as the Third Plenary Session. It's hugely important. And I think, it may be boring and quite dull, but part of our mission here is to make Chinese politics a little bit more accessible for our audience. So why not?
All right, since we're doing it, Zichen, would you like to start us off by giving us a little basics on what is the third plenum?
Well, Chinese politics 101, and you'd better buckle up. The governing party here is called the Communist Party of China, CPC, which has 100 million members across the nation. Every 5 years, their delegates gather together at a national congress of the CPC. In 2022, we had the 20th Party Congress, which produced the 20th Central Committee. The Central Committee is made up by members and alternate members, about 300 people. According to the constitution of the CPC, the Central Committee has to meet every year, at least once. So that was 2022 in the 20th National Congress of the CPC. This is now 2024. We are having the third plenary session of the 20th Central Committee of the CPC in July next month.
You sound like ChatGPT that knows everything about China.
Well, I was going to say, but Ernie with Baidu, because he's citing all Chinese sources.
Well, we also have, Kimi and other generative AI products here in China. And but we want to be exact and accurate. And some of the AI products may not perform as accurately as possible. Huh?
But good for you. You didn't mix up one term. I mean, it's a very complicated thing to say. But jokes aside, it must be said that of all the national congresses, of all the plenums, the third plenum seems to be always the most important and the ones that are drawing the most attention. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, all the past third plenums, they are all related to reforms. For instance, the very famous 11th third plenum in 1978, which marks the very beginning of the reform and opening up policy. And also the 18th third plenum in, I think,
2013.
2013, yeah, like almost like 10 years ago. It set out the goal of deepening the reform comprehensively, and it emphasized that the market play a decisive role in resource allocation.
If we go back a little bit, for example, in the 12th third plenary session in 1980s, the plenary session was saying China should have a planned economy based on public ownership. But 10 years later, at the 14th third plenary session, China was transitioning to a socialist market economy. So in 10 years, at two different plenary sessions, there was a huge change in the economic system of China. So these are the sort of products, the consequences of the third plenary session.
Yeah, I think it's also important to tell the audience that we are recording this episode in June, and the third plenum this year is scheduled for July. And you just mentioned about that people have expectations about the third plenum. But actually, I mean, when the 11th third plenum, one of the most significant ones, was held in 1978, we three were not born, right?
Yeah. No. I was born in December 1988.
Yeah.
Okay, so you are a dragon?
Yeah, that's correct.
And Liu Yang, you were?
Well, I'm a snake. I was born in 1989.
Okay, here another snake. So we have two snakes and one dragon. Two snakes, one dragon. How about that for another name of our app?
I have absolutely no objection to that name.
We'll think about it.
Okay.
Okay, but I mean, basically we are all around the same age. And for me, Zichen just mentioned about like the 12th third plenum in 1993, right? I think that was the time that we will grow up, right? When I was a child, I remember in my hometown in Nanjing, the capital of Jiangsu province, I think at that moment there were only like a few malls with toys selections, and only one that was famous for foreign toys. So I often, try to persuade my parents to bring me, in some like the Children's Days festival to go to that store that I can buy some foreign toys. But now 30 years later, I mean, I don't think I have even to mention about the Pop Mart, the Chinese blind box toy brand,
I
which
think
now
some
has
of these toys that we have displayed here are from Pop Mart.
yeah, and it's a blind box, right? You don't even know what are you going to buy, right? But it's their business model. I mean, the point is that you don't even have to go to any stores. You can just stay right in your apartment, and you can buy almost any toys over
That's one
online.
of the monumental changes of the socialist market economy, institutionalized in the 14th Third Plenary Session, huh?
Right. I mean, all three of us, even though we didn't get to see the drastic change before and after 1978, but I think there were big changes in the 1990s and in the 2000s when we grew up. I mean, I'm sure each one of us has a lot of these kind of stories. I mean, I'm from a town that's even smaller than your hometown. You're from Nanjing, right?
Yeah.
So I'm from Baoding, and I distinctly remember when I was little, even bananas are considered a luxury because bananas is not grown in the northern part of the country. And back then, there were not a lot of cross-region transport. So even
and Baoding is also, Baoding is an important city in Chinese history, right?
It is.
Even that way, you don't even have much options like in fruits. You just
right, because Baoding doesn't grow bananas, even though it's very important in Chinese history. And I'm sure, Zichen, you have stories to share as well.
Well, I think one of the things I'd like to, if you really want me to share, is that when I was young...
Where are you from?
I'm from Hefei, capital of Anhui province.
Okay.
And
Anhui and Jiangsu rivers, right?
Yes, and just by the way, people now jokingly call Nanjing as the provincial capital of Anhui province because so many people from Anhui go to Nanjing to work, to live. And
I think many different cities in Jiangsu have different saying about this.
So what are you going to say about your childhood story?
Well, yes, I remember, when we were young and still in elementary school, we had to go to a Wangba, an internet cafe to play computer games like StarCraft. And but Jiang Jiang and I actually tried to find a Wangba in Beijing now, and it has
play
become
StarCraft, a very old school style play games.
But it has become increasingly very difficult because everyone has access to computers, to laptops at home, and also high-speed internet access. So that thing has diminished from Chinese lives. That's also, I think, one of the changes in the past 30 years. Huh?
I think Hefei is now actually one of the hubs for innovation in China. I mean, think
the
of
capital of electronic vehicles, right?
Yes, I think, for example, there is a Chinese brand EV called NIO, which has put its production base in China, in Hefei, and Hefei is also actually.
Why do you select Hefei to?
Well, I think part of the reason, and I think Bloomberg, the economists have all written about it, is that Hefei has a sort of industrial policy that has become very effective, where basically the municipal government became a venture capitalist, and a former local leader of Hefei proudly says, we are the people's government, and we are trying to make money for the people.
Is that also part of the socialist market economy system?
Well, I think so. That's but I'm pretty sure in 1978, nobody in the world would foresee that, right? These changes, some of them are planned, some of them are just, natural developments that not just Beijing, but people across China, they try on themselves, experiment on a local level, and then be, basically made more popular across the nation.
I think
That's
we've
the amazing
provided,
part of the...
I think we've provided enough context for the theme of today's show, which is, let's not forget, the third plenum of the 20th Party Congress. So let's look at the upcoming session. What do we know about it?
Well, I think the first instance that actually caught my attention was that I think back in February, when General Secretary Xi Jinping was chairing basically a committee meeting. The committee is dedicated to comprehensively deepening reform. He mentioned that the year 2024 would be another monumental chapter in the comprehensively deepening reform. And I was thinking maybe that would mark some sort of that's actually some sort of a signal. And in March, when the president was meeting, I think a dozen American CEOs, and as well as Graham Allison, the founding dean of Harvard Kennedy School, he also told the visiting Americans that China was planning major reforms, and so I put it out in my newsletter, Technology. So that's what I thought at the time, and I'm glad the third plenary session in July will cover reforms.
Yeah. I think she often mentions about like deepening the reform comprehensively in his inspections. And I think it's hard to imagine if the plenary session will not happen this year, right? Because he mentioned that so often. And another point that we should let the audience know is that I think the main agenda of the third plenum, which is study the issues concerning further deepening the reform comprehensively and advancing Chinese modernization.
All right, let me stop you right there. I mean, these two terms, we see them all the time. They appear all the time in Chinese official documents, but what do they mean? Can we have a short and brief explanation for our viewers, please?
Well, it's indeed a mouthful. So let me take the first,
Please.
the comprehensively deepening reform, because obviously, as Jiang has said, the third plenary session of the 11th Central Committee took place in 1978. Ever since then, it has been over 40 years. So rounds and rounds of changes, of reforms. So I think since the third plenary session in 2013, it means comprehensively deepening, basically more and more in-depth reforms in the future. That's what the term implies.
So basically, reform pro plus max, right?
Well, you apparently are an Apple fan.
Yes, I do use Apple. I confess.
So I'll leave the next term, the Chinese style modernization or the China's path to modernization, to you,
Well, Chinese modernization, it has 5 aspects, but I'm not sure you want me to recite the full version here today. Let me put it in this way. The Chinese modernization is different from the Western development model. For instance, it emphasizes modernization for 1.4 billion people. So every person can benefit, should benefit from the modernization path.
Common prosperity, right?
Common prosperity, for instance, right? Yeah, and also it emphasizes peaceful development. I think in our last episode, we actually discussed this a little bit, right? The peaceful development of China.
Right. Which is super relevant today.
Yeah. Because there is all this talk about China wanting to start a war or actively preparing a war or expansion. But as we underlined in our last episode, where we talked about a foreign affairs article, and we underlined that what Jiang has just said is the official summary by the CPC and the Chinese government about basically the path and the direction of the Chinese development. And the authorities keep reminding people, keep telling people that we are on a peaceful road, and this is the road we will keep going down. So I don't think that's warmongering, domestically.
Right.
Yeah,
obviously, we won't have enough time to cover the entirety of the Chinese modernization, but luckily, Xinhua Institute, which sponsors our show, has just rolled out a very comprehensive report explaining what that is. So the link is down below. Be sure to check it out.
Well, basically, the municipal government became a venture capitalist. And a former local leader of Hebei proudly says, we are the people's government and we are trying to make money for the people.
The Chinese modernization is different from the Western development model. For instance, it emphasizes modernization for 1.4 billion people. So every person should benefit from the modernization path.
Common prosperity, right?
Common prosperity, yeah. And also, it emphasizes peaceful development.
As you said, JJ, the announcement was made in late April, and it's been almost 2 months since. Has anything happened in these period of time that we can observe that can maybe help us understand or predict what's on the agenda in next month?
I think one event that worth to note is that she held a symposium in Jinan, Shandong province in May. It was an event that some experts and entrepreneurs attended, and they give their suggestions about Chinese policies. I think there are 9 people voiced up in that symposium, including a very renowned economist, Zhou Qiren, and also another entrepreneur, Ding Zhizhong, who is actually the chairman of the very famous sports brand Anta.
Yeah, I think, Jiang just mentioned Professor Zhou Qiren. He is with the School of National Development at Peking University. He is an elder of championing economic reform in China. So his attendance in the symposium has raised quite a few eyebrows, as well as there was a CEO of the Chinese operations of a German company, and I don't know the pronunciation perfectly, Bosch. And,
yeah, that's Bosch. Yeah.
You majored in German
That's
in
right.
college,
That's,
right?
That's true. Yes. But I want to ask, what exactly about the symposium that makes you guys link it with the third plenum next month?
The third plenary session coming up in July, that's a huge undertaking. So by the tradition of the CPC, the Communist Party of China, these kind of events and the outcomes, which is expected to be some major decisions in writing, they take a lot of time to prepare. So before, third plenary session and other similar major political events, the authorities would, solicit opinions and advice from a wide range of, experts, entrepreneurs, officials, academics, and this May 23rd, I think, symposium in Jinan is one of those preparations.
So if I understand it correctly, in this preparation period, even Xi himself would personally interact with these scholars, with different factions to hear their opinions, even foreigners.
Yeah. I think I remember she also raised a question about the unicorns. I mean, the unicorn companies in China. I think example that he interact with the entrepreneurs about like the very practical issues in China.
Right, I remember that episode where he questioned why the number of
New unicorns
in China is slowing
unicorns
down.
is typically defined as a private company, which means it hasn't been publicly listed. A private company that is valued above $1 billion within the 10 years funding period. So yeah, he did ask that question, and so I think
it's a very targeted question, right? I mean, it's targeting at the problem.
Yeah, I think because unicorns, I think at least in recent memory, are typically technology companies, so they are very important to not just employment and taxation, but also they represent some sort of power of a economy of a big nation. So that's something quite important. Yes, indeed.
And I don't know if you noticed that there is actually a foreign people sitting, I think, in that symposium, right? Like,
so even foreigners can participate in these sessions and express their opinions on the reforms and opening in China.
I think I saw from the video footage of the symposium, and we did some homework, and the foreigners is I think a Dutch national who has been running businesses in China. And just by the way, Zhou Qiren, I think he is a graduate from University of California, and if I'm not mistaken, Bai Chong'en, current dean of a school within Tsinghua University, was also seen in the symposium, according to the video footage. He was also a graduate of University of California.
Yeah, I think some overseas China watchers.
Victor Shi,
David Shi, I think he sent a tweet like talking about like the alumni of the university in California, like they all held like important positions in China decision making. I think that also reflects that China is trying to learn from other countries' experience, and the talents who went overseas, they come back and contribute to the policy making.
So aside from the people who actually attended the symposium, do we know what was discussed at the symposium?
I think, for example, we can tell from the official readouts of the meeting that what Professor Zhou Qiren said at the meeting was about, reforms should help enhance the sense of gain for the masses, for the people of China.
What is sense of gain to you guys?
Well, money,
Well, that's a very straightforward answer. I think we can all use some more cash in our pockets.
Yeah, I think the sense of gain speaks not just to cash handouts, but also, the social security network like pension and medical insurance and even housing. So these are like also, for example, the support for parents who are about to give birth to new children. These are all the things supposedly to be included in the framework of enhancing the sense of gain for the Chinese.
Aside from the symposium that we just discussed, I understand that Zichen, you are covering the third plenum in your newsletter, Pekingnology. Could you just briefly walk us through what did you cover?
Well, one of the things is the symposium held in Jinan, and there was also actually for me, I think that's very meaningful. Is there was a CPPCC meeting recently in Beijing, which CPPCC in China means political advisors, official political advisors. They also held a meeting where the CPPCC put out, I think, dozens of recommendations from CPPCC members. So that's also something we should refer to if you really want to get a sense of what the third plenary session could talk about, could address in the reforms. And also there was very recently an article in the Qiushi journal.
So you did like a third plenum serious newsletters, right?
Oh.
Did third plenum pay you as a PR for this?
Well, definitely not. And but I think our audience for this particular program, I think I think they are similar to the sort of subscribers to our newsletters. People who are very, very interested in China, especially its politics, and who probably have a stake in China, whether they invest in China or they study China or they are diplomats working with China or on China. So this is the sort of things we try to cover. Huh?
Yeah, I think lots of overseas think tanks, they also pay lots of attention to the articles, to your newsletters and the articles like issued by Qiushi or by Xinhua or by the People's Daily, right? I think Neil Thomas from the Asia Society, he has a Twitter thread analyzing the articles from Qiushi to predict the themes for the third plenum. I think in one tweet he said that, well, some sentence from Qiushi implicate that the U.S. exports, the sanctions, the tariffs are actually infecting China's technology. And so China is also trying to develop its own technology, push the innovation, and the term new quality productive forces is also very important, will be a key theme for the third plenum, in his opinion.
Indeed. Qiushi is always a very reliable and official source of information on Chinese politics.
And
you cover something.
The official, just put it plainly for our viewers, Qiushi translates to seek truth, and it is the top theoretical journal of the CPC, the Communist Party of China. So it comes out bi-monthly, so every 2 weeks. So Han Wenxiu, a executive deputy director in China's Central Office for Finance and Economics, he put out an article in the latest Qiushi and talking about the potential reforms. But let's be very specific. He was not saying that.
He didn't mention third plenum in his article,
all.
right?
Yes.
But he mentioned about like further deepening the reform, which is the theme of the third plenum.
So in his article, he wrote about stuff that you guys thought were related to third plenum, even though he didn't specify a clear.
I would say I would be surprised if there is no connections between that, but I have no demonstrations. Yeah.
So what exactly did he write about?
Well, it was quite a long article, and what caught my eye is like there were 6 areas of potential reform. And the first thing he mentioned was indeed what Jiang just referred to is, I think Neil Thomas laid out in his Twitter thread. It's about, basically China wants to have better science and technology, and especially their application in the new industries. But, of course, I don't think we could exclude the factor of U.S. export controls and the competition on China. But at the same time, this is a huge economy. And out of the path of China itself, China would want to have like better technology in terms of manufacturing. And I remember when I was young, there was this was quite popular back then, is that China had to produce like 800 million shirts to get, to earn enough money equivalent to perhaps one Boeing airplane. And,
right. Shirts, socks, matches. Yeah, I mean, the different versions of the same story, basically.
Yeah, but now, China is has already produced the C919, which is C919. It's a narrow-body jetliner. So it has become a sort of a competitor with Airbus and Boeing. So I think that's an example of the rise of science and technology and their role in the Chinese development. Huh?
Yeah, and Han Wenxiu's article is also very long. Can you just simplify like the other 5 areas you mentioned?
You guys are really putting me on the spot here.
You are the ChatGPT 4.0 on China.
Well, I do think, for example, I think on the fifth point, Han Wenxiu also talk about, enhancing people's sense of gain. And I think he mentioned about, potential
Money.
Supportive measures that would encourage, Chinese men and women to give birth, because it is universally recognized that, first of all, there is this fact that the new birth in China is falling, and secondly, people really want to have like more support from the government and from their employers to incentivize them to, have more time and perhaps better compensation for having children. So that is also a thing that Han Wenxiu talked about in his Qiushi article.
Yeah. Well, if I have to summarize, I think all the 6 areas, they are all like problem-oriented thinking patterns, right? The first thing you just mentioned about the technology is actually about like the development momentum issues, right?
And he also talked about, this is about attracting the talents, including from the overseas, which reminds me of a very recent podcast by Donald Trump. Did any one of you see that podcast?
I think I saw that where he said foreign graduates would be given a green card to the United States.
Yeah, on day 1, according to him. Huh?
Right.
But actually, China also have such type of policies, right? Not exactly the same, but in the first part that you just mentioned about in Han Wenxiu's article, it says that China is trying to retain, to attract, and to create a favorable environment for non-Chinese talents. Actually, well, through my recent interactions with the Chinese academic circles, there are actually many Chinese professors, they are studied overseas. They even, doing their research in overseas countries, and they came back to China. They're talking about, create a favorable environment, like academic environment, not only for like Chinese experts, but also for non-Chinese experts to attract them to come here.
So can you give me a name? Which scientists are you talking about?
I cannot, but
it's off the record.
It's off the record. Yeah. But I mean, it's a hot issue that I think the Chinese people understand the importance that the success of the Chinese development path, we have to also learn from the others, right?
Yeah, I think that also speaks to the fact that opening up has always been understood as an inherent part of China's reforms, since the 1978, when, China was having more and more students study abroad. And also China joined the WTO in 2001. And so from the Chinese perspective, like opening up, high-level opening up, is always part of the reform path. And I think that's also what Han Wenxiu talked about in his articles.
Well, that's why 改革开放 or reform and opening are 2 words that always sort of go together in the Chinese language. When you think of one, you think of the other. The 2 are hand in hand.
But to be sure, we are still waiting for the details. And Han Wenxiu laid out a series of potential areas, but perhaps due to the limitation of space, we should expect the details. For example, what specifically would be mentioned, would be rolled out in the reform package in the Third Plenary Session of the 20th Central Committee. And also, have you heard of Professor David Daokui, Li Daokui?
Yep.
I'm sure you do. Huh? He's a very renowned economist, and he just gave a luncheon talk
in CTG, right?
Yeah, at my current employer, the Center for China and Globalization, where he said he wasn't citing any internal sources, but he was confident that measures about supporting consumption, measures supporting birth would come out. And I also put it out in my newsletters, and I'm grateful Asia Society's China 5 newsletter.
Yeah, yesterday their newsletter also included that part. I saw that, yeah.
So, I mean, yes, of course, those are all great sources to be looked into. But I'm wondering, as we approach closer and closer to the third plenum, do we expect more sources to come out and maybe shed a little light on what's the direction of reforms that might undertake in this year's session?
Well, we don't know, but according to my observation, I mean, the overseas think tanks, they are really heavily on the documents, the articles from Qiushi and from like the mainstream Chinese media, right? And I think they have a rational expectation about this year's third plenum. And the new quality productive forces are the most frequent term they were using to describe the main theme of
Carl
Third Plenum.
Mizner also mentioned about it
Yeah.
in the Council on Foreign Relations blog post, right?
Yeah, the topic is about advancing manufacturing would be the theme of the Third Plenum, in his opinion, right? Because the high quality development, it has become the theme of the Chinese economic and social development so far, right? And I think the policymakers are trying to seize the opportunities provided by the technological revolution and the industrial transformation through new quality productive forces, right? I think you also have another newsletter explain this, right? It's about like the TTP, right? The total.
Yeah, I think that was Yao Yang, another very renowned professor and former dean of the School of National Development at Peking University. He was trying to, give his opinion on what new quality productive forces mean, and he was citing some very authoritative sources that the new quality productive forces, which is another mouthful, means China would work to increase the total factor productivity, which is another term in economics, and that's the direction that the new quality productive forces will send.
Or it seems that if you know where to look, the clues are actually everywhere. So for our viewers,
this is a place you should look, huh?
Well, aside from this, and aside from your newsletters, what are some good sources that you would recommend our viewers to follow if they want to pay closer attention to the Third Plenum?
I think 学习时报 can be another source. I don't.
I think that's the newspaper Study Times of the Central Party School. Yeah, I would also try to encourage you, if you really study China, to look into the CPPCC meeting that I mentioned a few moments ago, because first of all, the CPPCC is a official political advisory board, platform, and secondly, the CPPCC after the meeting has published those recommendations. So in my understanding, those are no longer just personal recommendations. They have received some sort of institutional endorsement. And thirdly, all those CPPCC members making those recommendations, they hold very significant roles in China, including former vice ministers and former ministers. So it's not that there are no clues, but you need to keep your eyes open.
And also know how to read between the lines, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
All right, let's get personal once more. What do you expect will happen after the Third Plenum? How will it touch your lives?
Well, there is a topic, although I'm not sure it will appear in the Third Plenum, but I think it's definitely a very key issue that connects lots of people's life. That is the delaying retirement, right? We don't know if there is any real policies about delaying retirement will be shown up in the Third Plenum. But let's say if there is a delaying retirement policy, we three, born at late 1980s, we will probably retire when we were like 65. But maybe you don't have to, because you will make enough money before that, right? You'll be a fireman.
Well, I hope so. But just to give some context to the discussion is, currently China's mandatory retirement age for men is, I think, 60.
Right.
And for women is even lower, 55.
55.
That's pretty low by all standards, pretty low. And we've seen, reforms of retirement age in other countries as well. For example, in France, where President Macron announced the delay of retirement age, which was met with quite some opposition. So this is actually, I think, it has also been hotly discussed on Chinese social media. It's quite a divisive issue. Some people simply don't want to work longer, but economists, intellectuals, people believe that this is something that has to be done. It is one of the more painful reforms. But on the other hand, people are living longer. Many people are quite healthy and energetic after turning 60 years old. Enabling them, because the mandatory retirement in China is like mandatory. You have to retire after 60 years old. It's not that you are given an option. So taking advantage of this very talented, experienced human talents this is also, I think, within the potential cause for delaying retirement age. And yeah, I think this is part of the China's transition of dealing with a new demographic situation because new births are falling, and it is part of the changing social patterns. There is a paradigm shift in terms of economic development and social
because at the
progress.
end of the day, the current retirement age is simply not sustainable financially, correct?
Yes, I think so. Yes, that's correct. And I think that's the consensus by experts who have really studied the issue. Huh?
But I mean, have you thought about retiring later, retiring 5 years later? I mean, have you thought about it? I mean, what do you feel about it?
Well, if I'm still writing a newsletter at 60, I'll keep writing it until 65. Huh?
Yeah, I think it's also about your satisfactory level of your job, right? I mean, some people just love to work, like Zicheng. So
That's
sometimes
not healthy. Huh?
well, it's maybe not that sustainable, but you can. Well, at least I can see your passion in it, right? But for some other people, maybe I mean, not everybody, are that into their jobs, and it's a common thing, right? But maybe after retirement, they can have the opportunity to seek other interests that they can develop. So I mean, it applies. Different people have different situations.
I think
Right.
Past official documents from the Chinese authorities have mentioned adjustment of the retirement age on a appropriate basis. So that language is quite broad and leaves a lot of flexibility. And but this could be on the table, right?
Right. I mean, for broader context, the retirement age right now is set according to life expectancy, which is much shorter than now. Since then, China's life expectancy has grown much longer than before.
It's higher than that of the U.S. now.
Right,
Although
and-
the U.S. is a deviation from the
Other-
Western developed countries.
Right, and I think it makes some sense that the retirement age reflect the growing life expectancy because people have more years to live after 60.
Yes, and part of these reforms is not just narrowly economic. It's in China we tend to use the word 经济, which means economy, and 社会, which means society together. So all these changes are not just economical, but also social or societal. Huh?
Yep.
And another sector that I think we didn't touch much in our discussion today is the financial sector. I mean, actually, my first job after graduation is working as an auditor in accounting firms, which is
One of the big four. Huh?
well, yeah, it's kind of related to financial sector, right? Though I'm not in that sector, but I still have some friends in that sector. I believe financial reform will also be part of the deepening reform process. We just don't know how far away it will go. But so far from the documents, you can see that I think China is trying to avoid a path that maybe some Western country, for example, the US, has been experienced. We call it like the hollowed
Industry,
right? Hollowed out because of the too much emphasis was on the financial sectors. I read an article by, you just mentioned Yao Yang, right? I think she mentioned that the people who graduated from MIT, their first priority in their career selection is to go to the financial sector rather than to go to Silicon Valley. So
Right.
but
That's something Beijing tries to prevent from happening, right?
Right, or to stop from happening because it's already happening. People from PKU or Tsinghua University, a lot of them, their first choice of career would go into investment or investment banking.
Even though their majors would be, quantum physics and mathematics and computer programming,
Right.
and but I mean these subjects have a big role in finance these days, huh?
Right, and
I also add that actually the regulation of the financial sector is not saying that China is going to, attach less importance to the financial sector, but make it more like regulated. I remember that when I was a student, when we graduated from our university, like many people, like top level students, they would like to select the financial sector because it has high financial returns, right? But in recent years, you can see that there are some cuts in their salaries. And
For example, CICC. Huh?
Yeah, and some experts mentioned that it's not like a punishment to the financial sector, right? It has a very important role. But on the other hand, a cut of the salary is kind of a guidance to let the next generation, when they select their career path, not just only focus on financial sector.
Right.
They are also about like they can also select the advanced manufacturing sector or some other like technological driven sectors.
I think China basically sees finance as an industry, as a tool, as a medium, as a channel for providing funding and allocating basically funding for other industries that are deemed by Beijing and I think by a great many Chinese people as well.
It's the mean that just is the mean for the
end.
For the end, yeah.
Yeah, and so I think after 2008 global financial crisis, the United States also introduced what's the name of the act, Sabans? Sorry, I can't recall the name exactly. Basically, regulating the financial industry much more tightly, and China took a lot of lessons from that act as well.
So that's why China emphasized the new quality productive forces, right? And by the way, our sponsor, the Tsinghua Institute, has released a think tank report on new quality productive forces. So I think you have read that, right? Any takeaway from that report?
Yeah, I think one of the points I think laid out in the summary of the report is that basically, new quality productive forces is compared to old quality productive forces. Traditionally, China was like the factory floor of the world, rolling out shirts and lower end, for example, toys that we just talked about. But these require a lot of input, like labor, like a lot of resources, and they had some detrimental effects on the environment because a lot of them are highly polluting. So that's a phase that China wants to move on from, because we are having basically fewer births, and so the number of new people joining the workforce is not as abundant as before, and also China wants to have higher value-added goods, and also the environmental protection. Not to mention the zero carbon goal that President Xi has laid out, that has taken a much higher priority in China. That's also mentioned in the Hanwen Xiu, which is a central officials article in Qiushi.
One of the more interesting points that I noticed about new quality productive forces is that in its definition, it is the changes or innovations in the real economy. In other words, it doesn't include the virtual economy or finance. It just seems that the financial sector has been sort of left out of the new quality productive forces that China is actively promoting.
I think General Secretary Xi Jinping talked about the new productive forces, new quality productive forces, if we have to be very literal in the translation, in the symposium in Jinan, where he was answering, I think, a advice or a question from an expert from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, Zhang Bing, and he was saying, the new quality development, the new quality productive forces, it shouldn't be limited to, let's say, solely the high technology industries, but all the traditional industries, if they can upgrade through more, innovative and technological investment and advancement, all these old industries can be upgraded, and that could fit into the definition of the new quality productive forces as well.
All right, let me touch on a subject that could be very personal to you and is closely watched by our viewers outside of China as well. Is the real estate market considered part of the new quality productive forces?
I think it's kind of part of the traditional sectors. Do you agree?
Well, I think there has always been this huge debate about real estate. Real estate is estimated to account for between 15% to 30% of China's GDP. It's huge, and with all due respect to the phenomenal rise of EVs and solar panels, their share of the Chinese economy is still very limited, especially compared to the real estate industry. So, I think the Chinese authorities rolled out a term called 先立后破, which means to establish the new
before tearing down the old.
Yes, exactly. So, although obviously we are seeing a dramatic decline in sales of apartments in Chinese cities, this is still a very important industry, and as much as many people don't like it, this is a fact that people have to deal with it. And this is also, of course, in the news because many Chinese developers have defaulted on their debt, including their U.S. dollar denominated debt. And so I think recently the Chinese banks have injected a new funding to these real estate developers. And based on what we call 白名单, right? A white list. So a little while ago, that basically the cities set up a sort of white list for specific projects, housing projects, so the banks can lend to. But now it has been relaxed, so the banks can lend to the headquarters of these real estate companies. So I think Beijing is fully aware of the importance of the real estate industry, and because the industry has a lot of ramifications. For example, if people don't buy new apartments, if they don't get the departments that was promised to be delivered to them, you wouldn't buy new refrigerators, you wouldn't buy new TV screens, and the people who sell furniture will suffer as well, right?
All right. So, but for the bottom line, if we were to guess where the direction of the real estate market is going, is it going to be a hard landing? Is it going to be a soft landing? Is it going to maintain the status quo, or is it going to face a resurgence? Which one is it going to be?
Well, I hope it can have a soft landing because I bought like a real estate property like a half a year ago.
Wow.
But why would you not wish for a resurgence? Because you already own property now.
What resurgence?
I think you just bought one half a year ago, right?
Yeah.
Why would
so
you?
he's basically betting on the market to stabilize and not to dive even lower.
Okay, so you want the market to stabilize.
Yeah, I want the market to stabilize. I'm saying do not decrease, right? But on the other hand,
You seem nervous, huh?
yeah, I don't know how to touch about this question. It's kind of personal, but there is still time, and I think we cannot decide if we have already touched the.
I think Zhang can't come up with a very comprehensive answer is because basically people have vastly different opinions. For example, some people believe in mega cities like Shanghai and Beijing, there is a bottom for the housing prices, and we are already at the bottom. And some people just don't believe that. They think the prices will just dive because there has been a paradigm shift and because of changes in population and stuff. But there are also other experts. For example, Xu Gao at Bank of China International, who is a chief economist there. He believes that if the current trend continues, the housing prices will rise up again in several years. So that would be good news for you, huh? Because he thinks the new projects are so low now. So in a few years there will be a shortage in big cities like Beijing and Shanghai, and the demand is still there, he believes.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't expect it to rise up so quickly. Just stabilize is okay for me.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Right. As you said, people have different interests, people have different opinions. So it's a hugely controversial, sort of like the age of retirement too.
Yes, and one of the things that I think was frequently mentioned, and Vice Premier He Lifeng also chaired a symposium, I think some month ago, is basically for the Chinese government to come up with more subsidized housing in the cities. And because, part of the complaints for the sky-high real estate prices is that people on a normal job simply couldn't afford it. So, and this is a Communist Party-led socialist China, so the government should do more to basically help people buy apartments. And I think even under President Clinton, there was a plan to increase home ownership. So this is something that different countries share. And,
right, that's true. I mean, high property prices are driving young people away from these large cities like Beijing and Shanghai in search for cheaper housing. I mean, because, right, I mean, let's face it, housing in Beijing and Shanghai or Shenzhen, for that matter, is just becoming unaffordable for many people who just came out of college.
Yeah, I think that is also aligned with the common prosperity goal of the central government, right? I mean,
for the government to play a bigger role in subsidize households and families and people in one way or another. For example, helping raise the pension or maybe strengthening the health insurance or help subsidize housing. Huh?
Yeah. And I think also Neil Thomas also mentioned another observation that he think the Chinese government is reluctant to the tax and transfer reforms, which can actually improve the equality. I don't know if your opinion on that. That seems another like tough challenges that we have to cope with, right?
I'm sorry, pardon. What did you say?
The tax and transfer reform.
Oh, I think he was saying basically, one of the observations of basically China watchers is that China has long been reluctant to directly subsidize families, for example, in giving cash handouts and various sorts of welfare programs. And
that's true. China is used to do it about another way, like building infrastructure, like building roads or railroads that it believes that can benefit these underdeveloped regions and population.
And the central government is keeping, I think, revisiting all like these places to ensure that they are not coming back to the poverty level, right? So it's a continuous effort.
Rebranded as 乡村振兴, basically rural revitalization.
Right, that's like a second phase of that to fortify the accomplished gains and to ensure that people do not slip back into poverty.
So you are saying like these sort of campaigns should also be seen as a welfare program, huh?
Right, because a lot of these monies are taken from the more prosperous regions in the eastern coastal region and redirected to the more lesser developed regions. So it's also how the Chinese government moves wealth
I think,
in the society.
This actually reminds me of a photo I just saw like 2 nights ago, which shows actually for example, the northernmost province of Heilongjiang, which I had the privilege to work for 4 years. Actually, it is like the biggest base of grain production in China, but its GDP per capita is quite low nationally. I think it has also been mentioned somewhere related to future reforms that there should be some sort of mechanism of basically compensating these grain producing regions, of course, by the money from the more prosperous southern and eastern provinces. Huh?
Right, I think Henan province, maybe Shandong province, or the northeastern province of Heilongjiang, Jilin, and Liaoning all stand to gain a little bit more from this program.
Yeah, I think that's a part of the Han Wenxiu article, right? He mentioned about like coordination between like different regions, right? That is also one of the key themes of the Chinese development.
But these things, I mean, for outsiders may think, Beijing will just give an order and the rich provinces will just give the money to the poor ones. But actually, well, I don't know, but I guess it would be actually a quite dynamical process, because I don't know if you remember, like, there were a lot of books about, Zhu Rongji's reform, which is like 20 years ago. As the premier at the time, he had to go to province by province to convince, for example, rich provinces like Guangdong to share more government revenue with the central
Persuading
authorities.
is a very generous word. Some even say that he was begging for money from these provinces.
The reforms, from the outside looks maybe just some centralized guidance, but it involves many factors and many stakeholders who sometimes have conflicting interests on their own. So this is a huge country, and there are different, companies, private ones, state-owned ones, richer provinces, poor provinces, like people who have been better off and who haven't been better off. So these are the sort of balances that a reform package will need to address. And naturally, some controversies could arise, and that makes why reform is so difficult. Of course, not just in China, but also across the world. Huh?
Right. I mean, one common thread of everything that we touched on today, whether it's property market prices or whether it's age of retirement, one common theme is that it's not going to be everyone who's happy about these reforms. But I think we are confident that these reforms will serve the greater good in China for its entirety.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember that. I think over 10 years ago, the official document saying that the reform has entered into the deep water zone. And the leadership emphasized that we have to have the courage of going deep into the mountains, knowing well there are tigers in the mountain. The tiger can bite people, right? That represents the courage of push forward the reform, knowing there are tough challenges. I believe we all agree that we still have many tough challenges ahead in terms of reform, but we have to have the courage and determination and measures to cope with these challenges to comprehensively, further pushing forward our reform.
All right. On that note, that is all for our program today. Thank you for tuning in and stay tuned for our next episodes.